Good evening, everybody. Welcome to today's Arvada City Council workshop for today, January 13th, 2026. Ms. Rush, if you'll do the roll call.
Mayor Simpson?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Mormon?
Here.
Councilmember Ambrose?
Here.
Councilmember Davis?
Here.
Councilmember Pfeiffer?
Here.
Councilmember Griffith?
Here.
Councilmember Levison?
Here.
All right, we have two workshops this evening. The first is the proposed rewrite of Chapter 66, Parks and Recreation of the Arvada City Code. I'd like to welcome Mr. Ryan Stevenson.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Joining me is Janelle Miller. She's our Science City Attorney, so we'll be splitting the presentation. The purpose of today's workshop is to introduce Council to the proposed repeal and reenactment of Chapter 66, explaining the reasoning behind the rewrite and walk through how the draft is structured. This is an informational and preparatory discussion intended to ensure Council has clarity and context ahead of the formal considerations that will happen at the first and second readings. Before we begin, I'd like to ask Council to hold questions until the end of the presentation. That'll help us, it'll help our flow a little bit. Yes. Not on record, I won't, no. And we also—
Just turn off his mic.
We also want to thank Councilmember Levison for sending specific questions in advance. Many of those questions are addressed directly within the presentation, and we'll make sure to point those out as we go along. So I do want to clarify at the outset, this is not a red line exercise. It's a replacement. Due to the level of reorganization, a red line would have resulted in nearly the entire chapter being struck out, being crossed out. So we wanted to not do that to you. Instead, existing provisions that remain are applicable. Those have been integrated and renumbered. Those have not been deleted. The intent of this work is to modernize the code, provide clearer guidance for staff and the public, and align Chapter 66 with how the city manages its recreational assets today. So a little bit on purpose here. Chapter 66, as you know, that regulates our park system, our recreational assets. The last rewrite that we've had was in 1981, and our community has changed quite a bit since the 80s. But we have revisited the chapter since that time. That's when the full rewrite happened. Actually, there was a revisit in the late 80s, in 88, early 90s, early 2000s. The most recent editing happened in 2011, so almost 15 years ago now. And I do want to point this out. What we're working with today is still useful, but it has become a chapter that reflects past conditions and not necessarily our current operations or community's expectations. All right, so when we begin to look at our purpose here, the park and many of our current regulations, they are sparse, they lack some guidance that we need in the operation. Some examples include issuing park permits, temporarily closing areas for vegetation or restoration work, and formally establishing hours of operation. Another major gap is that the code does not distinguish between different recreational assets. We manage open space, parks, facilities, golf courses, urban design amenities, each with different operational safety and management needs. So the goal of this rewrite is to repeal and reenact Chapter 66, so it both modernizes existing rules and introduces new ones aligned with industry's best practices. This helps facilitate sound management techniques while setting clear expectations for our public. Make sure I stay caught up here. There we go. So when we begin to look at some stewardship and climate and some overuse issues that this chapter addresses. It will specifically, what it does, fosters an accessible and inclusive community that preserves and improves quality of life when ensuring safety. It also supports VCN's mission, which includes engagement in civic life, your public arts, and the outdoors, and ensuring responsiveness to our changing community needs. And from a departmental standpoint, this rewrite supports all 8 of VCN's goals, particularly around our stewardship, our access, our safety, and long-term sustainability. So again, this is not a standalone legal update. It's a governance tool that aligns with council direction. Get to my next here. Okay. So when we begin to look at maybe some risks and authority and some guardrails, so to speak, our approach here was very intentional. It's very balanced. You'll see that. Where existing regulations were still applicable, we left those. Those provisions were, again, integrated into the document, into the draft. You'll see that they are oftentimes renumbered or retitled for clarity. And where gaps existed, we added new procedures and regulations so the expectations are clear for our staff and users, and in case we need to do enforcement, it's helpful that way as well. This is why we describe the effort as a replacement rather than a red line. Coming up very shortly, we'll also get addressed in slide 7, a little bit later in the presentation. That slide provides a clearer breakdown of how existing provisions were integrated. So I think I've said a bit of the context here. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Janelle, who will walk through the integrated and new content that includes our definitions, authority, and regulatory updates.
Thank you, Ryan, and good evening, members of council. I'm going to kind of run through, like Ryan said, what our approach to drafting was and kind of go through the content that you're going to see in this new version of Chapter 66. So from a big picture perspective, how we have this draft broken down, it's divided up into 4 articles. The first article addresses administration and management of our recreational resources. The second article houses the majority of the acts that are prohibited in or upon our resources. The third article is focused solely on the Arvada Blunt Reservoir, and then the fourth one is for our city-operated golf courses, so that's Westwoods Golf Course and Lake Arbor. Okay. So like Ryan mentioned, there is a lot of integrated content in here, so the vast majority of our current regulations that are housed in Chapter 66 have been pulled over into this draft. So I've outlined the sections on here, so 22 through 33, those are our public parks regulations. Those have all been pulled straight back into Article 2, with the exception of one example that I'll give, and then same with our Arvada Blunt Reservoir rules. All of those have been reintegrated into Article 3. The only provisions that we did not include are just the ones that are no longer either relevant or applicable. For example, the one that I was going to talk about was 6661. That's our park permit fees for groups who are consuming 3-2 beer. 3-2 beer doesn't exist anymore, and the way that we handle our permits and fees and everything, that's going to be in a separate section within both in Chapter 2 and within this new Chapter 66. So because it just was not relevant anymore, we just chose to leave that provision out. But everything else that's currently on the books, it has been reintegrated back into this draft, especially if they were still valid or still working, we're still going to utilize those same provisions. So, but what we are going to see is some new content. So I'm going to run through this kind of article by article and start with Article 1. We are going to first see a new definitions section in Article 1. So right now, Chapter 66 only has one definition, and that is the definition of a park. But it does not currently account for, like Ryan said, we have a bunch of different types of recreational assets that the city owns and maintains. Those are not even included in the current definition, and the current definition actually refers to facilities owned by, quote, the city or North Jeffco Metropolitan Park and Recreation District. Also doesn't exist anymore. So what we were trying to do is go in and add a number of definitions that do account for the different types of resources that we had define kind of role clarity, like who is the director? That's a VCN director. Who is a recreational official? Define that for folks so that we have a more robust section that is actually helpful to readers who are going through it. All right, so that's Article 1. This is also in Article 1. The second section that I wanted to touch on was the authority of the VCN director. So our code is currently silent in that respect. It doesn't outline like the duties or the responsibility of our director when it comes to managing the different types of recreational assets that the city is tasked with managing. So we've gone through and kind of outlined what those management responsibilities are and provided a number of considerations that the VCN director must factor in when they're making certain decisions. So for example, the responsibility to manage recreational assets in ways that maximize, enjoyment to all users, that reduce potential health and safety risks to users, and that promote resilience and sustainability. We felt that those types of considerations were important enough to include, to essentially put into the law that the director has to actually make those considerations when they're determining what to do with our assets. So for example, when we're managing those facilities, sometimes you have to make certain decisions, like having to close an area for vegetation management if there's certain regrowth that needs to take place. This provides the director with kind of an outline of how those, or what the process looks like for those decisions that need to be made. And then I've listed a couple other things that the code also allows for. So it outlines the authority of the director to set fees. So for example, our athletic field rental fees. It does provide a process for the immediate removal of a user or maybe an extended trespass of a user who is using the assets inappropriately. The city has always had the authority to either summarily remove a user or to trespass them, but what the code does is make it very clear on what that process consists of. So it provides the public with outlining the notice requirements that need to be met and how they can contest those decisions that are being made. So it's really more for folks who are using the assets to make sure that they understand what can and cannot be done on those assets. But then finally, the last section, it provides a process for the issuance of permits, which is not currently discussed, and the expectations that are associated with the use of a permit. Okay, Article 2. This is our unlawful acts section. So most of the integrated content that I talked about earlier has been integrated into this article specifically. So a lot of these provisions were actually already on the books, but some of the regulations have either been expanded or we did add a couple of them. So we expanded regulations related to vehicle and parking, hazardous activities, and animals. Again, that was all kind of already on the books, but we did add additional regulations when it comes to like permitting specifically, display of a permit, compliance with the permitting conditions, and then another thing we did was pull one of our sections on criminal mischief, so and damaging essentially property that does not belong to you, in this instance, a recreational resource. That's currently housed in our criminal code in Chapter 62, but since this chapter specifically focuses on recreational resources, we felt like it'd make more sense to include that over in this chapter, so we've kind of pulled that out of 62 and put it into here. But again, that's an existing regulation, it's just been kind of rehoused. Sorry, I'm kind of flying through this one, but the last one that I'm going to touch on is a new article, and I guess to be clear, I'm skipping Article 3 because the Arvada Blend Reservoir rules, all of those were pulled over. There's really no modifications to that section, so I don't think we need to really delve into it. But this Article 4 is new. This one applies only to Lake Arbor and Westwoods golf courses. Those are the ones that are city-operated golf courses. And the reason we chose to regulate these differently is because these assets are unique and they kind of live more on their business operations side of the city, so it makes more sense for us to regulate them more as a business, and they do differ in terms of what actions are permitted on the resources, or resource. So, for example, like alcohol consumption without a permit, or operation of a golf cart in the middle of a park, both of those would be prohibited typically, but in these instances, we sell alcohol and we give you a golf cart, so it wouldn't make a lot of sense for us to hold you to expectations that are not applicable or that you can't comply with. So we felt like it was appropriate to regulate these types of assets very specifically. So we did include regulations on consumption of alcohol, renting of golf courses, or golf carts, sorry, and modifying the course grounds and then fishing on course grounds. So all of that content is new per se, and it's housed in this one, or this section specifically. But, all right. Okay, so in terms of public content, city staff did actively seek input from members of the public that we knew were interested and committed to the well-being of the city's Parks and Recreation Department, and by that I mean our Arvada Parks Advisory Committee. We did send the draft out to them and requests for feedback. To date, I've only received one response, and I've not heard back from anybody else, but we did try to make sure that they had the opportunity to provide input in this draft. This ordinance will also be included in 3 different publishings for council, or the council packets to include this workshop, and then 2 subsequent readings. So we're hoping that we can start getting more input from members of the public. But in terms of what we kind of have on our radar is to bring the draft forward for first reading on February 17th, second on March 3rd, and then the ordinance would hopefully be then effective 5 days following publication, which would put us at about March 10th, I believe. So hopefully we would have these regulations in place before a lot of users start coming onto our parks so that they have clear expectations about their use of them come summertime. So. Well, that's all from me. Oh, there's a lot of questions, I'm sure. I just blew through that. So I'm going to bring Ryan back up and then go from there.
Councilmember Mormon.
Thank you for the presentation.
I don't think we're done yet, are
It
we?
says questions.
Oh, it is? Oh, it is. There we go.
I'm trying to follow the rules, Mayor. The use of alcohol in our parks under this regulation, is it only allowed at the golf courses? Or because I'm thinking like, you know, if I request a permit for the use of a pavilion in a park, I didn't think we would allow alcohol at all in those spaces, so I just wanted some clarification on the alcohol piece.
Depends on where you're at specifically.
Can you go to the
Please
mic,
into the
please?
mic.
Yep, go ahead.
Sorry, it just depends on where you're at specifically. I think there's some of the pavilions that we have enabled consumption of alcohol, but you have to have a permit and there's specific
Okay.
limitations on the type of alcohol you can consume. No, you know, you're not taking shots, you're not consuming hard liquor, but I think you can have like beer and seltzers and specific we have a definition of alcohol, and that's included on the permit. So if you are applying for it, you will be on notice of whether or not you can consume it, and if you can consume it, what that consists of.
Okay, thank you.
And all I would add there is that is a current practice, that they can ask for that, and they're told all the rules at the time that they do the reservation.
Okay, thank you for that.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Man, I don't, so Article 2, the first thing, it's funny, I brought this up about vehicles and parking in parks, just before we came down here. How are we enforcing that? Or how do you envision that to be enforced? Like, for example, you know, the towing laws have been a lot more complex now. So are we posting signs and then a tow company needs to post a sign? You know, I'm just kind of curious because this is coming up in the metro districts who are trying to enforce this on the parks.
Well, present day, we would go through posting signage so that the public knows. Then we likely would work with PD, public safety, on the enforcement end. I do not recall readily what we have done to do any towing. So that piece I may need to get back with you about.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that, I think the issue we're starting to see out west, and I'm sure it's happening in other parts of the city, is folks are either abandoning their vehicles at the parks, or they are putting their business vehicles there because their HOA doesn't allow them on their property, so they're driving them to the park across the street and putting them in a little parking lot there. Or, you know, those kind of things are happening. And so some of these parks have just maybe 6 spaces or a small parking lot, and so it's starting to invite things that overnight maybe parking's happening. And, you know, I know we have camping rules, so I don't know if that ties in. But how does a person who comes into those parking lots, I just want to make sure we're thoughtful and posting something that says, you know, I know it's public, but you got to be careful of what you say and how you say it. But basically, you know, something needs to be posted that says trespassing, and you would be towed if, you know, if you're overnight parking or, I don't know. But I don't want to be gaudy either with our beautiful parks to have like the laundry list of enforcement rules for the park, and then all the towing company signs, and then, you know what I mean? Then it just defeats the beauty of a park.
Yes, I do. We're real careful about sign pollution, so
Yeah,
to speak, there. And we don't want to create that out of this update either. You bring forward some real valid things that happen mainly, well, I was going to say some of our smaller park properties, but this actually also occurs in some of our larger ones too. So between now and the readings, that's something we can look into the operation of.
Yeah, just something that we can look at that's inclusive with the metro districts who are maintaining these city parks as well, and not just our own. And then how does the public know? Like, what notice do we do? I just hate to see that laundry list of, here's all our ordinances because you didn't read them, so let me just publish 66 Article 2 on a metal board and everyone reads it.
I understand.
So we can avoid that. And then, what was your question there, Randy? What was your question?
My question was around alcohol.
Oh, yes, there we go. I knew it'd come back if I just asked Randy about alcohol. Actually, it is related. So some of the festivals that happen in the city are not just beer. You know, like we have our beer fest, but I've been to festivals in Denver that are more festive and cultural that includes margaritas and tequila shots, you said that. And I actually went to Highlands and went to a Hispanic cultural event that was all tequila and margaritas in the street. So I want to make sure we're thoughtful that we don't discourage activities that could happen, because like the beer fest has been a success, but how about if they want to do a margarita fest? And
They actually took the beer fest away last year.
Alcohol or alcoholic beverages means a fermented malt beverage or malt vinous or spirituous liquor.
spiritless.
No, spiritus.
Oh, okay.
Spiritus. And we do have a couple different
But no
types
shots.
of permits that we can issue. So some of what's addressed in here is like, I want to have a baby shower at our pavilion. I need a park permit to go ahead and have this type of event. But we also have our special event permits, which is where like our
Okay.
big festivals, those are the types of permits that they're going to apply for. We do run those through the clerk's office, VCN. A lot of people do have eyes on those ones, and they are a little bit more lenient in terms of what is permitted, what types of alcohol you can bring in, and it is kind of event dependent. So it just kind of depends on the level of permit, but what we have here is more for like the everyday park
The
user.
general public,
Yeah.
Joe Blow showing up into the park and stuff, or just wanting to do a gathering at a pavilion. Okay, so an organized event will go through a special event through the clerk's office. Okay, got it. See, I knew it was about alcohol.
Councilmember Levesone, get us back in order, please.
Thank you so much for answering all of the questions. I appreciate it, and for including them. One thing I just wanted to touch on is, what will this look like for residents? What will they experience differently? And it sounds like permitting is going to be clearer, just kind of the rules and regulations and all of that, just a clearer picture on what they can and can't do. Would you agree, or anything to elaborate on that?
Absolutely, yeah. Once we get this clearer, we'll use the city's website, we'll use other communication modes and means to, I suppose, announce an update or, and to keep the residents informed. But yeah, this is intended to make it a lot easier, not only on the staff, but to make it very clear with the public what we can and cannot do. Particularly also with our vegetation management too. You know, we do the turf conversion. Sometimes that's met with a little bit of resistance. And this will really help us manage that program.
Awesome. Yeah, let's support those bees and butterflies and get more baby showers. Thank you.
Councilmember Davis.
So thank you for the presentation. I just had like one housekeeping issue. So there's a reference to a transient merchant permit for food trucks, and this is in 66-43. Could we just add the ordinance or whatever, a reference to that to that merchant permit so that people understand where that can be found. So it's just a matter of housekeeping. And then in 66-46, animals, B, horses. It shall be unlawful for any person to ride, lead, or otherwise permit a horse in or upon a recreational resource except upon a posted equestrian trail or designated equestrian center. To get from the park that's near the Arvada Tennis Center, I've seen horses on the concrete path between that and then the neighborhood. And then if you get into Davis Lane Park, to go to Danny Kendrick Park, you actually have to go through the park with your horse. And they're very respectful. I've seen them stay on the concrete path when they don't have an actual equestrian path. So I don't know how to address that, but there are these gaps where there's just not a trail available for a
Oh, I
horse
see.
to get to the next horse path.
Okay.
And so maybe if we can, I feel like this is a great job for APAC, is to go and look and see where some of those gaps are and then address them. Because then otherwise what would happen is the horse and rider would have to be on a city street, which that could pose its other different issues as well.
Sure.
They'd be back in the neighborhoods. So just take a peek at that, please.
Okay.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Got it, thank you.
All right, I see no additional lights. Great point, Councilmember Davis, on the gaps in the horse trails. Appreciate that. All right, with that, thank you, Mr. Stevenson, very much. All right, next I'd like to invite up Ms. Claudia Vaughn, City Engineer, for our Stormwater 101 update. Woo woo, stormwater.
All right. Well, good evening, Mayor and City Council. We're happy to be here tonight to kind of talk with you about our stormwater and floodplain programs here at the city. This is meant to be a one-on-one workshop, so we're just going to talk through some of the basics of the different areas of our program. And so with that in mind, we're going to start with kind of why do we need a stormwater fund? So rain falls from the sky, and in a natural environment, it hits the landscaping, and it would be absorbed into the soils. For more steeply graded areas, that water would eventually make its way to a natural drainage way, our creeks, our streams, some of our natural ditches. And as we start to build infrastructure throughout the city, we have an impact on that natural environment. And so those rooftops, the roadways, those paths that we create, they change the rate at which that stormwater makes its way either into the ground or into our natural drainage ways. So we want to come up with ways that we can reduce our flood risk as well as deal with potential pollutants that might enter into that stormwater as a result of urbanization, so from our cars or from other pollutant areas. So the Stormwater Enterprise Fund is created to do just that, to mitigate some of those impacts of the urban runoff. So that current budget this past year was $4.2 million, and that was for our maintenance activities. We had an additional $1.25 million that was for capital projects, so that is money that we used in partnership with Mile High Flood District to do some of our floodplain work as well as to do mitigation work for our pipe network. So our pipe network can look anything from inlets to that concrete pipe under the roadways, and as well as like any detention facilities that the city may maintain or own. And overall, the whole system is 220 plus miles of pipe, so it's a pretty large network. And then we also are responsible for 11 major drainage ways, so think of Ralston Creek or some of our other creeks that run throughout the city. And that drainage way infrastructure is 25 plus miles. And so to maintain all of that, we have 13 full-time staff that work on this infrastructure. Our engineering team is a mighty team of two, led by Melanie Walter. You're going to hear from her here in a minute. And that team does a lot of work around our capital projects. They process floodplain permits. They make sure that we have as high as possible a community-rated system. And then we also partner with Mile High and the state and the feds to do some of those planning studies for additional rainfall data as that comes in. And then we also have our regulatory team, and that team is run by Jake Moyer, who you'll also hear from later tonight. That team makes sure that our municipal separate storm sewer system, or MS4 for short, that we're in compliance with those regulations, that we're making sure that water that enters back into our creeks is clean. They also do a bunch of open channel inspections, as well as making sure our quality sampling and testing is done in an appropriate manner and method. And then we also have an operations team, and that team is managed by Craig Kaler. It's a team of 7, and they do a lot of inspections and maintenance work for our underground pipeline network. So they're going in and cleaning infrastructure, responding to any emergencies that we may have. If we have a failure that was not anticipated, a sinkhole, they're going to go out and help with some of that work. And they also, in general, are just responsible for the physical integrity of our storm system. So we're going to start off with Melanie Walter talking about our engineering group.
Welcome, Ms. Walter.
Thank you. Well, as Claudia mentioned, I'm Melanie Walter. I'm the floodplain administrator and manager of the engineering team in the stormwater group. I had practiced next slide, but I have the power, so I don't have to say next slide. So one of the services that our engineering team, the mighty team of 2, provides is delivery of capital projects. Those are 2 different types of projects: the local drainage issues that are logged in by are brought in by our community. They're either called in, Ask Arvada, or noticed by our operations staff, which Craig will talk about in the operations section. We insert that in our GIS mapping, and those translate into those orange dots that you see there on the map. The other type of project that we deliver are the major drainage way projects. Those are the ones that we partner with Mile High Flood District on, which I will talk about more in the next slide. 2 of the major accomplishments, major drainage way projects that were completed in the last couple of years: the Lake Arbor restoration, which we won an APWA award for. That's the American Public Works Association. And then most recently was completed the Ralston Creek at the Croat Canal Crossing. That's near the Westwoods Golf Course, in which our consultant Olson won an ACEC award. So that's basically the APWA of the consulting world, and they deserved every bit of that. So coming soon on our plate right now is the Arvada Center Regional Detention Facility. So if you're familiar with the area around the Arvada Center, there's a field that has the statues in it. So we're going to transform that into a stormwater quality and detention facility. We're working closely with the Arvada Center staff to make sure that we're setting them up for any kind of program that they want in the future. So both those types of projects are inserted into our prioritization matrix, and that kind of spits out the rankings. And so we look at those ranked projects, both types of projects, when we do our budgets and have the capital asks in any given year. As I said in the previous slide, one of our critical partnerships is through Mile High Flood District. If you're not familiar with who they were formed in 1969 in response to the 1965 South Platte River flood that decimated a good bit of downtown Denver. They are funded through property taxes at a county level, and the funding that each municipality receives depends on their population. So they get a chunk of that depending on their population. So 3 different buckets that we pull from them. The first bucket is the capital projects. So those are the major drainage way projects that are outlined in the major drainage way planning documents that I'll talk about in a second. That requires a minimum of 50% match for the local government. Then the second bucket is their maintenance plan. They're 100% funded by Mile High Flood District, and that could include services like sediment removal, bank stabilization. These are all in major drainage ways. Bank stabilization, vegetation management. One prime example of a maintenance activity that's going on right now is the Ralston Creek underpass at Indiana. That tends to flood pretty much every time it rains, so we're trying to fix that right now. And then the studies that we depend on them for are the flood hazard area delineation studies, or the FADs. Those establish the floodplain boundaries, and those are the basis for the physical map revision that happens at the federal level. So those are 100% funded by Mile High Flood District. And then the major drainage way planning documents, those take the information in the FADs, and they make recommendations on infrastructure and how to mitigate those risks. And those require a 50% local match by the local governments that affects. So it could be multiple governments in that particular watershed, and collectively they offer up 50% for those studies. And those studies make recommendations for capital projects that inform that first bucket there. And then I do want to point out that we partner with our development review staff to make sure that private developments working in and around major drainage ways, if they are doing any kind of work in a major drainage way, that they go through the Mile High Flood District protocol of review and inspection so that they are available for future maintenance dollars. So kind of real quick anatomy of a floodplain. We call it a special flood hazard area. It's also known as the 100-year floodplain. So those boundaries, there's a couple of different boundaries. The floodway, which is the area that's reserved for the passage of the floodwater, that's the swiftest, most dangerous part of the floodplain. And then there's the flood fringe, that's the areas in the green, in that map in the green. That's the area that's reserved for temporary storage of floodwaters. If there's no capacity in the flood or in the creek, then it just sort of hangs out there until there is capacity. So we manage the floodplain boundaries through floodplain permitting. Any work that's done in the floodplain, whether it's capital or private, even private residential improvements, go through floodplain permitting. We average in the last couple of years, we averaged about 80 to 90 permits. So I wanted to point out the importance of parks and open space in the flood mitigation projects that we do. About 2/3 of our special flood hazard areas are in parks and open space. So anytime we do a major drainage way project, we work closely with our VCN staff to make sure that there's dual purpose to it, that there's flood mitigation, but there's also a community amenity. Most notably, the Ralston Creek at the Crook Canal crossing, we made sure that there was ample visibility on the trail when we realigned it. So another deliverable that the engineering team gives is the participation in the community rating system, or the CRS. That is a benefit from FEMA that rewards communities for floodplain management practices that exceed minimum federal standards. That could be anything from emergency management, working with our emergency management and flood warning systems, public education and outreach, mapping, flood insurance information on our websites, inspection of open drainage way, stormwater quality requirements, things of that nature give us points. So those points are added up and then we're given a rank. The rank goes from 10 to 1. So 10 being the minimum amount that a community can do to actually be in the community rating system, and then 1 being the most resilient city. We're at about a 5, which sounds kind of middle of the roadish, but last I counted, there was only 7 communities in Colorado that are 5 or better. So it's actually pretty good. That gives us our community a 25% discount on flood insurance, but only if they purchase it through the NFIP. It used to be that this discount was not available to anybody outside of the floodplain boundaries, but FEMA has changed that in the last 5 years, and so anybody in or out of the floodplain can take advantage of this discount. So that's the way that we manage, the engineering team manages the floodplain, or the flood quantities. So I'm going to turn it over to Jake, who's going to talk to you about stormwater quality.
Thank you, Ms. Walter, and welcome, Mr. Moyer.
All right. Thank you, Mary. Mayor, City Council, sorry about that. Yes, as I said, I am Jake Moyer. I am the Stormwater Administrator for the city. And the majority of what we do is compliance through a mandate. This mandate stems from the Clean Water Act, which is then, this is held by the EPA, through the Clean Water Act, the EPA set water quality standards for waters of the U.S. This is then delegated to the states. For Colorado, it is delegated to the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. These standards are then set by the state. They can meet the EPA standards or they can exceed the EPA standards, but they can't be below the EPA standards. So this is all really set, outlined through what's called a municipal separate storm sewer system permit. That's really terrible to say, so we say MS4 permit for short. And this permit really encompasses 6 different program areas that are outlined on this slide. And I'm going to go through each one of them. So education and outreach, we really combine that into one program because it's kind of the same effort. So along with maintaining stormwater educational documentation on our website at all times, we also work very closely with our Majestic View Nature Center to provide educational programs focused on environmental sustainability and stormwater quality. And then we also participate in city events and river cleanup events each year. And in 2025, we did present to the Majestic View Nature Center Water Camp, which is a lot of fun. We just kind of show kids the impacts of stormwater pollutants in the urban setting. Next is going to be our construction oversight program. So we provide monthly inspections for all of our active construction sites to ensure site cleanliness and minimize pollutants into the storm sewer system. So one thing I wanted to note with this program, I was here presenting to you back in late 2024. At that time, we did a major code update that made the city part of what's called a qualifying local program with the Colorado Department of Department of Health and Environment. So just reporting back to you, that has successfully streamlined the private and public permitting process, as well as ensured that we are compliant with all of the state environmental stormwater requirements. So in a sense, we're one of 4 permittees that participate in that program, and it makes our relationship with the state very strong. The next program is going to be our post-construction oversight program. So we provide routine inspections on all public and private stormwater facilities that provide water quality and detention. So in 2025, we did conduct about 35 total development inspections. That includes inspections for entire developments, which include multiple stormwater facilities. So that would be a total of around 80 stormwater facilities. So we average about 80 to 100 inspections of infrastructure per year. And I didn't highlight this, but the construction oversight program in 2025, we had 860 total inspections with 7 escalated enforcements. So that can either be like a notice of violation or a stop work order. Next is going to be our Good Housekeeping program. So we conduct routine inspections for all of our city facilities that have the potential of polluting any pollutants into our storm system. We also train all the municipal staff on appropriate stormwater best management practices and spill response. So that's everyone from our operators to even our city hall staff, just for general stormwater education. And then lastly is our Illicit Discharge Detection and Elimination Program, or IDDE. So we respond to, track, and enforce on all non-stormwater discharges into the storm system. So this is really anything from oil leaks to illegal dumping. So containers being thrown into creek to just a simple antifreeze leak or oil leak. All right, so that's our MS4 program in one slide. Then I'm going to cover a bit of our open channel inspection and maintenance program. So our staff determines inspection areas throughout the city based on watershed basins and complaint areas. We then inspect the creeks and open channels throughout the city, working with our CIP engineering team on any kind of major maintenance issues, and then working with internal staff and outside contractors for smaller maintenance issues. And then on this slide, it does say approximately 25 miles mapped. That is 25 miles of creeks. We have an additional 25 to 30 miles of open channel. So in total, that's about 55 miles mapped. All right, and last but not least, and the most fun slide, I'll have to say, is our water quality sampling and analysis program. So we sample for common pollutants within every creek and city-owned lake on a monthly basis, following seasonal trends and assessing specific locations where human-made pollutants enter the system. So CDPHE is applying additional regulations that limit total coliform, which is also called E. coli, into our system. So to address this, staff has implemented a dry weather monitoring system. So what this means is that during the summer events, when we're not having rainfall, we go out and we assess each of our outfalls to make sure if they're flowing or not. And if they're flowing, we take samples, and if those samples are above what the threshold is, we'll follow that pipe upstream and do additional sampling and analysis to pinpoint where that contamination is coming from. We do also use human indicator DNA testing with this, so we can actually dial in if this is a human source or if this is just coming from the natural environment. And then one last thing, wanted to highlight with this program, we do utilize a summer intern every year to gather valuable data along our creek corridors and then conduct routine sampling and analysis. So, thank you, and I'm going to pass it off to Craig for operations.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Council. Thanks again for the opportunity. My name is Craig Kaler. I'm the manager for wastewater and stormwater for maintenance operations. So I'm here to talk about maintenance operations. This first slide here kind of shows our stormwater map. And as Claudia mentioned earlier, we've got over 220 miles of pipe and then thousands of maintenance holes, inlets, and outfalls, which we spend our days inspecting and maintaining those. On the map, you can see where we have the storm system broken down into our 10 basins. So when we do our maintenance operations, we'll start on the upstream side of a basin and work our way through to the downstream side. The green dots on the map represent items that we've found that need additional attention. And in 2025, we started on the east side and we're working west. So you can see that a lot of what we have found that we'll be working with Melanie and Jake's teams to solve are on the east side there. Inspections, cleaning, and repairs, this is what we do every day. So we've got a few pictures here to kind of show you some of the things we're running into. We are actively inspecting all of our pipe with cameras, remote cameras, identifying needs, and then we have additional equipment to go in and clean the stuff out. So kind of looking through these pictures here on our top left, we've got a PVC pipe that at one point a small root was able to get through into a joint. And once it's in there, it's found a really great water source. So it continues to grow and expand and cause more damage to the joint. So identifying those things, it's a bit of a process you can imagine to get those things cleared out of there, but our storm system isn't working effectively when we have things like that in there. The top right is a corrugated metal pipe, and we've got a lot of pipe like this that was put in the ground 15, 60 years ago that has rusted through. So there's just a hole in the pipe, and everything that was outside of the pipe is now inside the pipe. So we've got mud and road base and rocks and all sorts of stuff in there. So that's obviously not only a cleanup, but we need to do something with that pipe. Bottom left, That's a picture of our camera, and we're inspecting a corrugated metal pipe, which typically this pipe didn't have a lot of flow in it, but the bottom was completely rusted out. So for us to be able to inspect, we needed to create something on the bottom for our camera to run on. So we developed a mat basically that we run that thing on so that we don't fall through the bottom of the pipe. And then bottom right, this is something we've been seeing a little more than we'd like. This is where someone has bored their utility right through a concrete pipe of ours. And in our storm system, when they do that, there's no water spraying out of the ground. There's nothing saying that they did that. So it's going to be like that until we get teams in there and just randomly come across that. So in this case, we've got to identify whose utility that is and then get them to remove that and move it outside of our pipe and then fix or replace the pipe. I'd like to add that on our team, we have our damage prevention team, and they primarily do our utility locate work. But when we come across this, they lead the charge in identifying what utility has done that and then pursue through a couple different avenues of finding a remedy for it. Some of our accomplishments from this year, we removed over 2 tons of debris from our storm system and cleaned over 14 miles of that system. And then, like we were just talking about with this boring damage, we were able to make 9 of those pipe repairs ourselves. Some of them are pretty complicated and we might need some help from a contractor, but we're able to do some of those on our own. So we've completed 9 of those in the past year. We're also helping other teams. That's an important thing for us, and this is where we kind of work with some of our other pieces of our storm team. When we've got a spill, we tend to be quick to arrive with the proper equipment to contain the spill and then assist in getting it removed. If it's getting into the storm system, we're there to track it down to figure out where it's entered and what can we do to mitigate all that. On the right-hand side, you'll see we're helping with some open channel cleaning. We've got some teams that are working on that, and we're always available to assist in helping get some of that work done. And then also our inspection of our new pipe. So whether we're replacing existing pipe, or if under a new development we're adding to our storm network, through that warranty process, our team is called upon to do a final inspection of that pipe and make sure that it meets our standards and specifications, so that when we take it out of warranty and we own it, we know what we're getting. I'm going to hand off to Claudia, I think.
Welcome back, Ms. Vaughn.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm just going to wrap us up. So we wanted to come up with some ways that the community could really help us out to make sure that Arvada and our waterways are as clean as possible. And so these are just some ideas of ways that we can do that. So the first one is to really never dump anything down a storm drain. If it's not coming from the sky, if it's not rainwater, it shouldn't be going in the storm drain. So when you're picking up leaves in the fall, please don't put those down the inlets. They cause clogging, which then Craig's team has to come out and address, or we will, have flooding in the roadway. That includes oils and paints, detergents. Those aren't good for our creeks as they make their way down. And then reducing any runoff and pollutants at your home from your property. So roof drains that can be directed to our landscaping areas are always going to be beneficial for our grass and our native soils, but will reduce the impact to our storm drainage system, its capacity. Use commercial car washes when you can. The debris that's coming off your cars, those cleaning materials, they're going to also make their way to our inlets and into our storm system. If you can plant native species on your yard, you're going to need less fertilizer. Again, that fertilizer can come off your property. And then fix any leaks on your vehicles. Again, our roadways, when it rains, anything that's captured on them is going to enter into that system. And then this is a really big one, clean up after your pets. So again, that waste material can wreak havoc and cause us to exceed those levels of waste within our system. All waste is not beneficial waste to those natural drainage ways, so we really want to minimize the amount of our pet waste into the system. And then, again, know your flood risk and consider insurance. It's a great safety measure that the community can take. We do our very best to understand how rainwater and flooding is going to happen, and we don't control the weather, so it's always a good idea to be as prepared as possible. And again, just want to put a plug in that we have 2 ways that you can reach out to us to let us know if you come across any issues. So our email, stormwater@arvada.org, is a great way that directly comes to our teams, that we can address anything. If you're seeing people illicitly discharging or you're seeing a clogged pipe, please let us know. And then you can always use the Ask Arvada portal as well to reach out to us. So with that, if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer those.
Councilmember Davis.
Ooh, you knew I was going to be all over this. Thank you so much for this robust presentation on stormwater. I actually was out on a run today at Rensselaer, and I took some pictures of Sandy McDonald stickers that say, don't dump drains to waterways, with the little fish on it. And I just remember that we did that as a collaboration across the DRCOG area so that we could draw attention to that. Something that I think that we kind of touched on but didn't really was, could you tell the public how stormwater is treated after it's captured and then released into the wild? You know, like wastewater and drinking water.
Yes, yes. So it's a kind of complicated answer. How stormwater is treated really comes at the development level. So when we have a development or a public project come in that disturbs a certain amount of area, that is required to meet one of really 2 different requirements. So you can either put in a facility like a detention pond that treats for what's called the WQCV, or the water quality capture volume. And really what that does is it allows the water from that development to flow to a low point where it accumulates for a certain amount of time to let the sediment and different pollutants settle out before that water goes into the pipe and into the creek. We've had more evolution around those facilities in the past 10 years. So we really like to promote what's known as infiltration facilities, which can either be either filled with sand or a combination of sand and vegetation. And through this, it's the same idea, but instead of holding back that water for a certain amount of time, it just allows the water to infiltrate through that medium and into the pipe and out into the system. We also like to utilize really any opportunities to direct the impervious area to pervious area. So that allows runoff reduction and reduces the flows into the system. It also promotes infiltration into the groundwater system. So it's really, we look at every project on a case-by-case basis, but those are the main things we incorporate.
But we're not capturing it and sending it to a treatment plant,
No.
correct?
No,
Yeah,
that
I think
is
that's
correct.
what's really
Yes.
important for the public to know, is that we don't treat that.
Yes.
Let's see. And I also wanted to say thank you for having an effective MS4 program, which truly is exampled by the fact that you only had 7 out of 800 plus permits where you had to have escalated enforcement action. So whatever you're doing is very effective, and I applaud you on that.
I would like to give a big shout out to our inspection team. They do all the work on that. I just take the credit.
Oh, there you go. That's the way to do it. So thank you so much for this. I know it might be tedious for some members, but This is something that's really important for sustainability and for our parks and really quality of life across the city. So thank you so much.
Mayor Pro Tim Mormon.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I want to go back to the conversation about Mile High Flood District. I appreciate the education on our partnership with them and how that relationship works. So I think if I understood, there's some different opportunities in which we can partner with them on different projects and priorities we have for our city. And so I know we're, looking at redesigning and making improvements to the Lake Arbor Golf Course. Can we talk more about the potential for partnership with the Mile High Flood District and that effort specifically?
I'm going to turn it over to Melanie. I guess I'll start by saying that we are going to come to you later on in the spring as we prep for budget and talk more about the Stormwater Enterprise Fund as a whole. We've spent a lot of time this past year working on our prioritization of projects and how we can sustainably fund that Stormwater Enterprise Fund. So I'll let her talk about it at a high level, but we'll definitely give you more details about what that work could look like in the future this spring.
So thank you for the question. We are considering, right now, we're just internally discussing that, where it ranks in priority. We've got lots of major drainage way projects that, have a very high ranking. And so we're having some internal discussions on where the project ranks and where to put funding. It's not just our bandwidth, but also Mile High Flood District's bandwidth as well.
Councilmember Griffith.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate the presentation. One item I just wanted to highlight is I just wanted to cheerlead for a minute any green infrastructure opportunities. Maybe these might be considered sort of more urban solutions, but street-side stormwater planters, porous landscape detention, basically using vegetative material to filter stormwater is something I'm really interested in more of those sort of right-of-way constrained areas. Right, I think that we have our neighboring municipalities are doing that, and I think I'd love to see that in Arvada.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll definitely look into how we can incorporate that.
And then the last thing I'll say is that incorporated with that is our tree canopy in the city. Trees have an amazing ability to absorb rainwater and stormwater, and they can be coupled with some of those types of facilities. And I think it's always good for us to look at our tree canopy as a whole. And our coverage and say, like, what can that do for urban heat island mitigation, quality of life, green city, all that sort of stuff. I think all these things are interrelated with stormwater, and so I was really excited to see the presentation today, and I would just encourage you to see if we can weave in some of those other innovative strategies where possible too.
Yes, thanks for the comment. Our current standards definitely have a tree lawn associated with our roadway. So we continue to implement that and work with our planning team as new developments come in and we do capital projects to incorporate as many trees as possible. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Levison.
Thank you so much. It sounds like looking ahead, we'll get more details on the budget side of things, but just a quick snapshot for anybody kind of watching at home. We've got it at $4.2 million, and just looking to staff and wondering how in line we were with that, with water paying for water. Did we stay within the budget, or were some needs there?
I can take a stab at that. And again, as Claudia mentioned, we hope that this would be a good foundational level information for the upcoming conversations with the council. We typically present a series of workshops really diving deep into the funds and the capital project prioritization where we can talk more. But at a high level, last year, council approved a 6% increase. That's primarily to support the minimum level of investment into that drainage improvement program that Melanie's team leads. So you saw a little bit of information of the projects they're doing there on the map. But essentially, what we didn't talk about today is how the rates and fees are calculated. And so that's about a 0.3978 cents per square foot of impervious area for each private or commercial property. And we typically, when we come to you and talk about rates and fees, we say, well, a typical 3,000 square foot impervious area might see an annual cost of about $71 a year. And so we try and put that into context with the other rates and fees for water and wastewater when we come talk to you.
But that 6% or that increase to the stormwater fees specifically went directly to those miscellaneous drainage improvement projects. We do want to go into more detail about the upcoming capital priorities and some different financial strategies we might want to consider in the future to make our system more resilient. So I hope that answered your question. I think the only other thing I wanted to add there is that primarily where that budget goes, in addition to the capital programs, is our personnel, our operations, materials costs, as well as the contractors and consultants that we use to support us when our own teams need support with the construction.
Thank you so much. That was exactly what I was looking for.
Okay, thank you.
There any additional questions from council? Seeing none, thank you much, Ms. Rhodes and Stormwater team. You guys were great. All right, that's all the workshops we have this evening, so it's going to be a quick night. Mr. Wicker, any updates from you and your team?
The only thing I have tonight is that next week we have a business meeting, and we also have a workshop on the West 72nd Avenue project. So we'll be coming back to you next week with that workshop. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Morris?
Nothing for me, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, with that, we are adjourned.